A love that lingered in rain, when two souls meet, drift apart, and remain in memory. A heartbreaking silent romance. The rain had been falling steadily, soaking the streets and turning the world into a blur of gray. She stood beneath the awning of a small bookstore, shifting her weight from foot to foot, trying to shake off the chill that had settled into her bones. The air smelled of damp earth and old paper, the scent comforting in a way she couldn't quite explain. A man appeared beside her, holding a black umbrella, his presence quiet, yet impossible to ignore. Their eyes met briefly, a moment that felt like it stretched longer than it should have. The city moved around them, people hurrying through the storm, cars splashing through puddles, yet there was something still in the space between them. She looked away first, pretending to check the time, while he adjusted his grip on the umbrella. Neither spoke, but something about the encounter stayed with her long after he had walked away. Days passed, and the memory of the rain lingered. She saw him again at the bookstore, standing in the poetry section, his fingers tracing the spines of books with practiced ease. She didn't acknowledge him at first, pretending to be immersed in her own selection, but she was aware of his presence, of the quiet way he carried himself. It became a pattern, silent meetings in the bookstore, a glance exchanged as they reached for the same book, the slight curve of a smile before turning away. The seasons changed, and with them their paths intertwined. They walked through the streets on crisp autumn evenings, the wind scattering golden leaves at their feet. In winter, they found warmth in quiet cafes, their hands wrapped around steaming cups of tea. Spring brought with it longer days and moments spent in hidden corners of the city, where time seemed to slow just enough for them to savor it. By summer, their lives had woven together so seamlessly that it felt impossible to remember a time before they knew each other. There was an ease to their companionship, a quiet understanding that required no words. The way he reached for her hand when crossing a busy street, the way she left an extra cup of coffee on the counter for him in the morning. It wasn't grand gestures or declarations, but rather the small things that spoke the loudest. As the months passed, their lives became like a carefully curated collection, each moment adding another layer to the story they were unknowingly writing together. She found herself drawn to him in ways she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just his presence that comforted her, but the way he seemed to understand the world as she did, through the lens of quiet moments and unspoken truths. They had become part of each other's rhythm. Their days marked by the silent exchange of glances, the shared laughter, and the small, tender gestures that built a language of their own. Yet, even the most carefully built moments could not hold back the inevitable. The change came gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. It was in the pauses between words, the hesitations in his voice that weren't there before. There were moments when his gaze would drift, as if he were looking for something beyond her, beyond the city, something she couldn't reach. The warmth that once filled their spaces seemed to thin, replaced by an emptiness neither of them could articulate. She tried to ignore the distance creeping in, telling herself it was just a phase, that whatever was weighing on him would pass. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away, like sand through her fingers. The ease that had once defined their time together began to feel strained, as if they were each holding back from something, some truth that had yet to surface. One evening, after they had spent hours walking through the city's quiet streets, she noticed it for the first time. He didn't reach for her hand when they crossed the street, as he always did. The absence of that small, familiar gesture struck her harder than she expected, as if the fabric of their connection had torn just a little, a small but significant unraveling. Days turned into weeks, and still, the silence between them deepened. She asked herself what had changed, but the question felt futile. There were no answers, no clear explanation for the shift that had taken place. He was still there, in the same places, doing the same things, but he was no longer the person she had come to know so well. The man she had shared her days with seemed to have withdrawn into himself, leaving only fragments of the relationship they once had. And then, one morning, he was gone. No warning, no explanation. She woke to find the space beside her empty, his belongings untouched, his absence filling the rooms in a way that felt both surreal and final. The apartment they had shared now felt cold, the echoes of their time together lingering in the spaces where laughter once rang. The days that followed were consumed by a quiet kind of disbelief. She retraced their steps, walking through the familiar streets they had once shared, hoping to find some sign, some clue that would explain where he had gone or why he had left. But the answers eluded her, just out of reach, like the memory of a dream that fades with the light of day. The silence left behind was deafening, a hollow echo that reverberated through the spaces they had once filled with their presence. She told herself she would forget, that time would smooth over the sharp edges of his absence, but grief was never linear. It didn't follow the neat patterns she had hoped for. Some days, the ache of his absence would be a dull throb in the back of her mind, while other days it would surge up, raw and overwhelming, as if the loss were fresh and new. The memories of their time together, of the way he had held her hand, of the quiet moments shared in the warmth of their home, had become bittersweet, things she both cherished and resented in equal measure. Yet, even as she tried to move on, as the months stretched into years, there were traces of him everywhere. In the corner of a cafe they used to visit, in the pages of a book she had left unfinished, in the rain-soaked streets that always seemed to remind her of the day they first met. Grief had a way of clinging to places, to moments, to the ordinary things that had once been infused with love. And then, on another rainy afternoon, she saw him again. She didn't know what drew her attention first, the familiar way he stood across the street, or the fact that the rain, which had been falling steadily since morning, seemed to pause in that moment, as if the city itself had held its breath. There he was, exactly as she remembered him, his figure outlined in the gray haze of the storm, yet somehow different, as if the passage of time had altered something subtle in the way he carried himself. He was standing at the same corner where they had once crossed paths so long ago. His posture was unchanged, the same quiet presence that had always felt like an unspoken invitation to something deeper. But now, as their eyes met across the rain-slicked street, there was no recognition in his gaze at least, not in the way she had hoped. The connection that had once seemed so easy, so inevitable, was now just a distant memory, a shared glance that belonged to a time neither of them could fully reclaim. She didn't move, didn't call out to him. There was no rush to close the distance between them, no impulse to bridge the gap that had grown between them in the time they had been apart. Instead, she simply watched, her breath steady in her chest, her body rooted in place as if the world around her had slowed to a crawl. He did not come toward her. He simply stood there, his figure a shadow in the rain, like a fleeting thought that was there and then gone. The space between them, once filled with warmth and familiarity, had become an impenetrable distance. The years of absence, of silence, had changed everything. The people around them moved as they always had, hurrying through the rain, heads down, umbrellas raised, but for her, in that moment, time seemed to stretch. The noise of the city faded into a quiet hum, the sound of the rain against the pavement, the only constant. Her eyes stayed fixed on him, on the figure that had once been so familiar, yet now seemed impossibly distant. 1,000 unspoken words filled the space between them, but there was no need to voice them. They were the words of all the moments that had never been shared, the questions that had never been asked, and the explanations that had never come. It was a quiet understanding that, in some ways, everything that needed to be said had already been said, and there was no point in trying to speak now. He turned away without warning, his movements slow and deliberate. She watched him go, her gaze steady, her body unmoving. The rain continued to fall, soft and insistent, washing over the streets, over the city, over the memory of everything they had once been. There was no rush to follow him, no desire to reach out and stop him. The distance between them, physical and emotional, felt insurmountable now. The quiet that had once defined their time together had given way to something else, something more final, more distant. In that moment, she understood that some things were meant to remain as they were, unfinished, unspoken, and unclaimed. She took a step back, the world around her shifting back into focus, the noise of the city returning as the space between them widened even further. There was a sense of acceptance in her chest, a quiet resolution that whatever had been was now gone. The man who had once shared her life, even if for a fleeting moment, was now a ghost of her past, something she could not change or hold on to. She turned and walked away, her footsteps quiet against the wet pavement. The rain continued to fall, a soft and steady rhythm that seemed to wash away the traces of the past. In the distance, the city stretched on, indifferent to the small, quiet tragedies that unfolded within its streets. Yet in the space where they had once shared so much, there remained something that could not be erased, a promise, not of a future or a reunion, but of a memory that would remain, silent and unspoken, for as long as the rain continued to fall. She didn't look back. And so as the rain soaked the city, washing everything in silver light, she let go. Not because she had forgotten, but because some memories, no matter how bittersweet, were never meant to be chased. Some stories did not need closure to be complete. Some things were simply meant to be, lingering in the quiet spaces between moments, untouched by time, preserved in the heart as they had always been. As she disappeared into the rain, the city seemed to embrace her, its hum steady, its pulse strong, as if to remind her that life, like the rain, would continue without explanation, without reason, but always moving forward. And in the distance, somewhere beyond reach, the promise remained silent, unspoken, and yet never truly forgotten.